Now, we're going to hear from the CEO Forum. While you've been having fun up here, they've been having fun down there. Words like awesome, inspiration, and things like that. So, may I invite Margot to come to the podium and tell us all about it.
Well, one of the things we decided is that it's really important to delegate because the real inspiration is with the people. So I'm actually not going to tell you anything. I'm going to ask Andrew and Chris and Karen and Peter if they'll come up and report back on our behalf. If you want to. We just went down one chair, so Peter has to bring his own chair. Andrew always brings his own chair. He's a very resourceful man. But we do need a mic. Yeah, wonderful. So this is a self-organising system we have here. So over to you guys.
I'm going to report very briefly on two things which we talked about, or which people brought to us to report back to you on. The first is the idea that in about 10 years' time, those companies that have already got the CSR message will be acting a little bit more like and promoting the idea of communities as opposed to hierarchies, particularly for the exchange of information. The second idea, which came to us late and with not much explanation, but I'll give it a go. I did like it, and I said I'd talk about it, and that's the phenomenon of biomimicry, where instead of using the natural world as resources, as say flora and fauna, we use them as models for organisation, models for communication, models for patterns of living, that sort of thing. That's all I have to report.
So just letting you know, this was Andrew Beattie, and he is a partner at Baker & McKenzie, yeah, and has been hosting Al Gore here for the last week. So thank you very much, Andrew. And this is Karen Moses. She's the COO of Origin Energy. And although it's a big male-dominated engineering organisation, she's an economist, but we'll forgive her that because she's wonderful.
I know how to talk to engineers. I'm going to touch on the question of how we share what we know. So education systems will be focused around processing information and gathering information and taking information and then learning how to have a dialogue from that, because the pace of change is so much that you can't just work on content, which is the current education system. That managers will be therefore, rather than decision makers, that they'll be facilitators of how decisions get made. So there'll be a huge devolution or empowerment around decision making and complexity. That everybody will recognise that they can change their world, that we won't be waiting for direction, we'll be actively changing our own worlds, and that we'll know that lessons can come from everywhere. As we know today that lessons can come from everywhere, but we'll just know it a whole lot better.
Thank you. And Chris Cupp is the founder of Social Ventures Australia. He was for many years the CEO of Colonial First State, where he did wonderful things around the culture and the bottom line.
Well, I'm in the wrong order. I said I'd sweep up after these, but I'm going to intervene because I'm sitting here. One of the themes that came out is that I quite liked is the one that we owe each other, not that you owe me. And I think it sort of intertwined with another theme which I think one of the speakers after me will talk about. But there are particular cultures and there's parts of the world like nature we just talked about who have really conquered long ago the idea of working together and you've got to rely on each other to rather than the system we're in now as part of a so-called developed society, which is very I focused. So the sort of we and the reliance on we and the community and all the various bits that can do, I think is one of the key things that should be coming out of the years ahead of us. And I must say too, I'm extremely confident working now in a non-profit sector where you see what people are doing and that reliance on working with each other, again, rather than just a take type of culture. So, yeah, a lot of upside there.
and Chris Kidd, who is a hydrogeologist. I never heard of one until I met Chris. And he runs an organisation called help me, Chris.
HLA Envirosciences.
HLA Envirosciences, and they do consulting in all sorts of areas, making people think differently and implement that around organisational health and safety, environment and sustainability.
And I'm not going to talk about any of those three, but I'm reporting on the feeling about workplace change and change in the workplace, that there would be a much greater flexibility in the workplace. There was some views were that we would have to work longer hours, and others were suggesting that particularly the Y generation, as it matures, would be pushing a change towards working much shorter hours, and that the workplace would be much more diverse, and that a lot more people would be working back in the community from home, telecommuting type exercises, and there was also a strong feeling that business had and corporations had the responsibility to make time available for people to participate in community-related activities, whether that be for environmental restoration or whether it be social activities, because there was a feeling that even though there would be more time on their hands, people felt that there was a feeling that the business had that responsibility to provide time for people to be involved in the community. From a business's perspective, this had a number of also advantages. It provided a greater engagement of the workforce and greater support for the values of the business, but also it was brought back new ideas from the community back into the business that could be applied to improve the business itself.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but certainly not least is the wonderful Peter Muirs. He's the Managing Director for Australia of Worley Parsons, which is an incredibly innovative engineering consulting company, which is one of Australia's really big success stories. Something like 70 or 80% of their business is now done offshore, and if you happen to buy their shares, you will have noticed that, like everything else that's good, it's on an exponential growth curve.
I think you should write that down. No one's ever described me a wonderful before, but anyway. Thanks, Margot. Margot worked us very hard downstairs, and we didn't really give any context to what we were saying. What she did was, first of all, introduced us to higher levels of thinking, and then challenged us all that we needed to lift our level of thinking, and then got us to think about breakthrough projects and other things. And we then had some storytelling and ended up with a challenge to think about 10 years from now, and how we'd like to, what our vision of how the world could be and should be in 10 years. And that was just, it's actually a wonderful way to think about the CSR challenge, because it's the next 10 years, I think, that will really make a difference. And what is it going to end up like? And the ideas you've heard are ideas that came from each of the tables. And one that I really liked came from Paul Knight, in fact, at his table. Paul's a member of the Indigenous community, and he reminded us that in Australia we have probably one of the most wonderful examples of all of true CSR thinking in the Indigenous community, who've looked after the environment forever, and in fact did that in a remarkable way, in that it was everyone's role in their community, in our Indigenous community in Australia, everyone's role and everyone's responsibility to care for the environment, in fact protect the future. And what an inspirational thought that is for us as we contemplate CSR. So if you want to talk to Paul more about that, he's here, but I thought that was a wonderful thought. We also had another thought came out that in 10 years' time, if we've succeeded, the pristine places that exist in the world today will still be there, and we'll be able to take our children or grandchildren, in my case, to see them. And that's just another wonderful thought, I think, for us to capture.
So the only thing I'd like to add to that is that when we took the opportunity to envision the kind of future that we wanted, it was really clear that if we're to have this future, each of us has to create it. And that wonderful saying that comes to my mind is, if it's to be, it's up to me. So I think the future is very much in our hands. If we want a future that we're proud of, if we want to take the wonderful Indigenous example and recreate it by being living custodians for the world in which we live, it rests with each and every one of us, and as does the power to make it happen. So thank you very much to everyone that participated. It was a very participatory session. Thank you to our wonderful panel.
Thanks once again, Margot, and everybody who participated in that forum, and for the great insights that you've just generated. I'm just reminded, listening to the feedback from that CEO forum, and what Margot's just said, it's up to each one of us. And we think, oh, no, I'm just a small little pebble on a beach. I'll just remind you of what Brian Tracy said about the potential of the average person. The potential of the average person is like a great ocean unsailed, a continent unexplored, a world of possibilities waiting to be released towards some great good.